My name is Olivia Reynolds. I am 31 years old. The day my father first tried to sabotage my independence by telling my older sister that my tech job was just a hobby that would never amount to anything was the moment I realized his love came with strings. That betrayal had been building for years. Now everything was colliding in the family attorney's office in Kansas City, Missouri, as my father leaned forward with a sneer and demanded I sign the estate papers in a way that funneled everything to his struggling business. He said I was too naive to handle money and that my relationship with my fiancé was a mistake that proved I couldn't be trusted with the family legacy. My hands shook with rage as the truth hit me. I would not be his puppet anymore. I was ready to fight back with every secret I had kept. If you've ever felt a parent try to rewrite your entire future to fit their vision, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in that moment. I read every single one, and it helps knowing I'm not alone. Let me take you back to how this nightmare unfolded. It started 22 months earlier when I met my fiancé at a little coffee shop near my office downtown. He asked what I did, and I gave the vague answer I had rehearsed. I worked in tech. He filled in the blanks himself and assumed I handled scheduling or basic support for the executives. I never corrected him. Why would I? My grandmother had left me a letter with her estate that I kept tucked in my nightstand, and her words had stayed with me like a warning. She wrote that a person's true character only shows when they think you have nothing to offer them. So when my father started making comments about how I needed to settle down with someone who could provide stability, I made a decision. I would give him the test she taught me. I would show up as the modest, unassuming daughter he seemed to expect, and watch how he treated me when he believed I was beneath his notice. My father owned a chain of home improvement stores that he had expanded over 25 years into a regional operation across the Midwest. He had always measured success by appearances, by the right connections, by the kind of life that looked impressive on paper. My mother tried to smooth things over whenever his comments grew sharp, but she never fully stood up to him either. My older sister lived the life he approved of, married into a family with similar business interests and always quick to echo his opinions. I, on the other hand, had built my career quietly after my grandmother passed when I was 26. I held 2 patents in logistics software. I spoke at industry conferences no one in my family knew about, and I earned $55,000 a month before taxes. None of them had any idea. I started dressing in simple clothes when I visited home, drove my old reliable sedan instead of the luxury model I could afford, and spoke humbly about my circumstances. My fiancé played along without knowing the full reason. He saw it as me being low-key. I filed away every eye roll from my father, every passive comment about how I should be thinking about a more stable future. The tension built slowly, the way a storm gathers on the horizon in Kansas City summers. Then the attorney called about finalizing details on my grandmother's trust. That was when things shifted from quiet pressure to something sharper. We gathered in David Hargrove's office on a rainy Tuesday morning. David was the family attorney who had handled my grandmother's affairs for decades, and he had always been fair. My father sat at the head of the table like he owned the room, his jaw set, in that familiar way that meant he was about to dictate terms. My mother sat beside him, fidgeting with her coffee cup. My older sister arrived late, scrolling her phone as if this were just another obligation. My fiancé waited outside at my request because I wanted to see how this played out without his presence softening anything. David slid the documents across the polished table and began explaining the distribution. My father cut him off almost immediately. "Olivia doesn't need the full share right now," he said, his voice carrying that cold sarcasm he reserved for moments when he thought he was being reasonable. She's still figuring things out. Better to direct it toward the business so we can secure the expansion. She can thank me later when she's not scraping by in some dead-end support role. The words landed like a slap. I kept my face neutral, but inside my stomach twisted. He had no clue what I actually did or what I earned, and yet he spoke as if my entire life was a disappointment he had to fix. My mother cleared her throat and tried to steer the conversation. "Victor, maybe we should let David finish before we decide anything." Her tone was careful, almost apologetic, the way she always sounded when she saw the storm coming, but hoped to head it off. My older sister just smirked and added, "Dad's right. Olivia's always been the dreamer in the family. Remember when she thought that college degree would magically make her important?" The jab stung, but I stayed silent, watching my father closely. This was the test in action. David shifted uncomfortably and continued, but my father interrupted again, leaning in with that condescending smile. "Look, the truth is the business needs alliances right now. The expansion has left us overextended, and the partnership with the Grant family could change everything. Tyler Grant would be a much better match for Olivia than that boyfriend of hers. At least Tyler understands what it takes to build something lasting." He said it so casually, as if arranging my life was just another line item on the agenda. My mother looked down at her hands, her face tight with something that might have been discomfort or quiet disagreement, but she didn't push back. My older sister nodded along like it was obvious. That was the first mini cliffhanger of the morning. I felt the floor tilt beneath me as the implications sank in. My father wasn't just disappointed in my choices. He was actively planning to steer me toward someone else for business reasons, treating me like an asset to be traded. I excused myself to the restroom to collect my thoughts, heart pounding. As I walked down the short hallway, I heard voices through the partially open door to the conference room. My father and my older sister had stayed behind while my mother stepped out to take a call. "She's too naive to see it," my father was saying, his voice low but sharp. "We'll use the trust to apply pressure. Tell her the money comes with conditions. If she insists on staying with that nobody, we'll make sure the business alliance with the Grants falls through in a way that looks like her fault. Tyler's family brings the capital we need. Olivia can be the bridge if she stops being so stubborn." My older sister laughed softly. "She still thinks she's independent. Let her keep believing she's in a support role scraping by. It makes this easier." I stood frozen in the hallway, blood rushing in my ears. This wasn't just snobbery. This was calculated. My father saw me as a tool for his empire, nothing more. The test had revealed far more than I expected. I slipped back into the meeting before they noticed my mind racing with the second mini cliffhanger of the day. How far would he go if I didn't play along? When the meeting resumed, I kept my expression calm. My father turned to me with that same superior look. "You understand what needs to happen, don't you? Sign the papers the way we discussed. It's for the family." My mother glanced at me, her eyes flickering with what looked like a brief flash of hesitation, but she stayed quiet. I nodded, slowly buying time. "I understand," I said, my voice steady, even though my pulse hammered. Inside, the anger was building into something cold and clear. I had come here expecting to test his character. I had found something darker. Later that afternoon, I called Laura Bennett, my closest colleague at the tech firm. She was the one person who knew the full scope of my success and had helped me on several high-profile projects. I told her everything in a hushed voice from my car in the parking garage. "I need you to help me look into the business finances," I said, quietly. Laura agreed without hesitation. "Olivia, this sounds serious. Be careful." Her warning hung in the air as I ended the call, another layer of suspense settling over me. That evening, my fiancé noticed something was off when I got home to our modest apartment. I told him only part of the truth, that the meeting had been tense. He hugged me and said we would figure it out together. I smiled, but my mind was already turning over the evidence I would need. The next few days, I played the role perfectly. I attended a family dinner at my parents' house in the suburbs, dressed modestly, spoke humbly about work, and let my father lecture me about making better choices. My mother tried to change the subject twice when his comments grew personal, her voice carrying an awkward edge, as if she knew the line he was crossing. My older sister piled on with her own sarcastic remarks about how some people never learn. Every conversation felt like a ticking time bomb. I filed away each cutting word, each assumption that I was struggling. David Hargrove reached out privately the following week with a subtle hint that the trust terms were more flexible than my father claimed. That conversation ended with him saying, "There are things in the documents your father doesn't want highlighted." The words left me staring at my phone long after he hung up, the suspense tightening like a wire. I dug deeper with Laura's help, pulling public records on the business. What I found confirmed the overheard conversation and more. The expansion had created serious debt. The potential alliance with the Grant family wasn't just strategic, it was desperate. And there were irregularities in the books that pointed to my older sister skimming for her own lifestyle. I printed everything and locked it away, my resolve hardening. My father thought he could control me. He had no idea I was about to turn his own game against him. 2 weeks after the attorneys' meeting, my father called me into another family discussion at the house. This time, Uncle Frank was there too, nodding along as my father outlined his vision for the business. "The Grants are coming to the 25th anniversary gala next month." My father said, his eyes locking on mine. "Tyler will be there. It would be smart if you spent some time with him. Show the family you're committed to what matters." His tone dripped with expectation, the kind that left no room for argument. My mother shifted in her seat, her expression tight as she tried to interject with a comment about letting me decide, but my father waved it off with a sharp look. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. That was the moment I knew the game had to end soon. I smiled and said I would think about it, but inside I was already planning the next step. Laura had found more documents. David had agreed to meet me privately to discuss options. The pieces were falling into place, but I could feel the danger closing in. If my father discovered I was investigating before I was ready, the consequences would be swift. As I left the house that night, my phone buzzed with a text from my older sister. "Dad's serious about this. Don't mess it up for all of us." The message sat on my screen like a threat. I drove home through the Kansas City streets, the city lights blurring past my mind, spinning with the weight of what I had uncovered and what I still needed to prove. The test had become something much larger, a battle for my autonomy that I refused to lose. Little did my father know the real reveal was coming, and when it did, it would shatter the control he had spent years building. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold, replaying every word from the night before. My fiancé had noticed the tension when I got home, but I kept the details vague, telling him it was just family business stuff. He squeezed my hand and said we could talk whenever I was ready. I smiled back, but inside I knew the clock was ticking. 2 days later, my mother called to say the family was getting together to plan the 25th anniversary gala for my father's business. It was supposed to be a celebration, but I could already feel the undercurrent of expectation. My father had invited the Grant family, and he wanted everything perfect. I agreed to come over, still playing the modest daughter role, but my stomach was in knots the entire drive. The planning meeting happened in the living room of my parents' house on the outskirts of Kansas City. My older sister was already there, flipping through vendor catalogs with a self-satisfied look. My mother poured iced tea for everyone, her movements a little too precise, like she was trying to keep the peace before it even started. Uncle Frank lounged in the recliner, nodding along as my father took center stage at the head of the coffee table. He spread out the guest list and tapped the paper with his finger. "This gala is make or break for the expansion," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of authority. "The grants are bringing real capital, and Tyler will be there the whole evening. Olivia, it would be smart if you made an effort to talk with him. Show some interest. Your little tech support job isn't going to get you anywhere long term, and we all know that boyfriend of yours doesn't have the kind of connections that matter." The words hit like a slap wrapped in sarcasm. He said it so casually, as if my entire career and relationship were cute hobbies he had to correct. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my face neutral. My mother set her glass down a little harder than necessary, her expression shifting to something sharper than her usual smoothing over. She glanced at my father with quiet anger in her eyes, the kind that said she was tired of the way he spoke to me, but wasn't ready to explode in front of everyone. My older sister jumped in right after echoing him with a smirk. "Dad's right. Some people need a little push to see what's best for the family." My father leaned back satisfied and moved on to the menu details like he hadn't just tried to rearrange my life again. The conversation flowed around catering and decorations, but the air felt thicker now, charged with the knowledge I had from the hallway and the documents starting to pile up in my hidden folder. That was the first mini cliffhanger of the evening. I excused myself to the kitchen for more tea, needing a moment to breathe. My mother followed me a few minutes later, closing the door softly behind her. She stood there for a second, her arms crossed, and for the first time I saw real conflict in her face, not just discomfort. "Your father means well," she said quietly, her voice low so it wouldn't carry. "But sometimes he pushes too hard. I don't like how he talks about your job or your fiancé like they're disposable. Just be careful with the gala, okay? I see how this is wearing on you." It wasn't full support, but it was something different, a private acknowledgement that left me stunned. She squeezed my arm once and went back to the living room before I could respond. I stayed in the kitchen a moment longer processing. The test was revealing layers I hadn't expected, and my mother's quiet anger added a new twist to the family dynamic. When I returned, my father was already steering the talk toward seating arrangements, making sure Tyler Grant would be next to me at the head table. "It's good for the business," he added, with a pointed look in my direction, "unlike some choices that only benefit one person." The sarcasm dripped from every syllable, another psychological jab designed to make me feel small. I nodded along, filing it away, but inside the anger was turning into cold determination. The next week, I met Laura Bennett at a quiet cafe near the office during our lunch break. She was the one colleague who knew the full truth about my salary and patents, and she had been digging discreetly into the public filings for my father's stores. We sat in a corner booth, and she slid a flash drive across the table. "This is getting serious, Olivia," she whispered. "The expansion debt is worse than it looks. Over $2 million in the red, and there are transfers that don't add up. Some of the trust money your grandmother left seems to have been redirected in ways that benefit your father's personal accounts more than the business. It's not outright theft yet, but it's close." My heart dropped. The second mini cliffhanger hit hard. My father wasn't just pressuring me for the family good. He had been quietly helping himself, using the very legacy my grandmother built as his safety net, while treating me like the unreliable one. I thanked Laura and promised to be careful. Back at my desk that afternoon, I stared at the flash drive in my bag, mind racing. My fiancé noticed I was distracted when I got home that night. "You've been quiet since the lawyer meeting," he said over dinner, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. "If your family is pushing you about something, you can tell me. I'm on your side here." I wanted to spill everything, but I held back, saying it was complicated estate stuff. He let it drop, but I could tell the questions were building. That conversation left another layer of suspense hanging over me. How long could I keep this hidden before it affected us too? The days blurred into more preparation for the gala. My father called me twice each time, with sharper reminders about dressing appropriately and making Tyler feel welcome. "Don't embarrass the family with that modest act of yours," he said. On the second call, his tone laced with contempt. "We all know you're capable of better if you tried. This alliance matters more than your independence fantasy." The words cut deep, exposing the long-held resentment he had for my choices. My mother texted me privately afterward, a short message that read, "Ignore the pressure if you can." I argued with him last night about it. Her quiet support was growing, but it felt fragile, like she was walking a tightrope. David Hargrove reached out again through a secure email, confirming some of what Laura had found. "The trust has protections your father is trying to bypass," he wrote. "If you're ready to push back, the documents are on your side." I printed everything in a second hidden folder, my resolve solidifying. The gala was now only 10 days away, and I knew the reveal had to happen there. It was the perfect stage, the one my father had built to show off his control. But as I finalized my notes one evening, my phone rang. It was my father. "Olivia, we need to talk before the gala," he said, his voice unusually calm. "There's something you should know about the trust that could change everything for you. Come by the house tomorrow morning, alone." The call ended with a click, leaving me staring at the phone in the dim light of my apartment. A new threat hung in the air, thick and unspoken. What did he know, and how far was he willing to go to keep his empire intact? The pieces were almost in place, but this sudden invitation felt like the calm before the real storm. I had uncovered enough to expose the truth, yet one wrong move could let my father twist it all against me. The gala was approaching fast, and with it the moment I would finally stop playing the naive daughter he expected. Whatever he had planned for tomorrow, I would walk into it ready, but the uncertainty gnawed at me as I lay awake that night, wondering if my test had just become a trap I couldn't escape. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house with the flash drive from Laura tucked in my purse like a loaded weapon. The sky over Kansas City was gray and heavy, matching the dread that had kept me up half the night. My father had said, "Come alone," and I had honored that request, but I made sure David Hargrove knew exactly where I was and when. If this turned into the trap, I feared at least someone outside the family would have a record. I pulled into the driveway of the 2-story colonial they had lived in for 20 years, the same house where my grandmother used to visit, and slipped me quiet words of wisdom about never letting anyone define my worth. The front door opened before I even knocked. My father stood there, in his usual button-down shirt sleeves, rolled up like he was ready for business negotiations, not a conversation with his daughter. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Come into the study," he said, his voice carrying that clipped authority I had heard 1,000 times. "We need to clear the air before the gala." I followed him down the hallway, my shoes quiet on the hardwood. My mother was nowhere in sight at first, which already felt off. Usually, she hovered nearby, trying to soften whatever blow was coming. My father closed the study door behind us and gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. He sat first, leaning forward with his hands clasped. I've been reviewing the trust documents again. He started, his tone laced with the kind of false concern that always preceded a demand. Your grandmother left things in a way that gives me some discretion as executor. The truth is, Olivia, you're not in a position to handle that kind of money responsibly. Your tech support role barely covers rent, and that fiancé of yours has no prospects. The smart move is to redirect the bulk of it into the business expansion. It's for the family. You'll thank me when you're stable instead of scraping by. The words landed with surgical precision, each one designed to remind me of the place he thought I occupied in his world. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my face calm the way I had practiced for months. This was the same man who had raised me, yet right now he looked at me like I was a loose end that needed tying up. Before I could respond, the door opened and my mother stepped in, carrying 2 mugs of coffee she clearly didn't want to be holding. She set one down in front of me, her eyes meeting mine for a split second, with that same quiet anger I had seen in the kitchen the other night. She didn't sit. Instead, she stayed standing near the window, arms crossed, watching my father with a tension in her shoulders I had rarely witnessed. "Victor?" she said, her voice low but firm. "Maybe we should let her speak before you decide everything for her." It wasn't a full rebellion, but it was the clearest pushback I had ever heard from her, and it hung in the air like a warning. My father waved a hand dismissively, not even looking at her. "This isn't up for debate. The Grants are expecting a united front at the gala. Tyler has already asked about you specifically. He sees the potential in aligning our families, unlike your current situation, which is holding everyone back." The sarcasm in his voice cut deeper this time, exposing the long simmering resentment he felt toward my choices, my independence, my refusal to fit the mold he had designed. My mother's jaw tightened visibly, but she stayed silent after that, her gaze dropping to the floor in a way that told me she was choosing her battles carefully. That was the first mini cliffhanger of the morning. I realized then that whatever alliance I thought I might have with her was still fragile, still conditional on not rocking the boat too hard. I took a slow breath and met my father's eyes. "I understand what you're saying," I told him, keeping my tone even, "but I've been thinking a lot about what the trust actually allows. David mentioned some protections that might not line up with what you're proposing." The words were a calculated probe, and I watched his reaction closely. For a fraction of a second, his expression flickered, something sharp and defensive flashing across his face before the condescending smile returned. "David works for the family," he said smoothly. "He knows what's best. Sign the updated papers I had him prepare, and this all goes away. The business stays strong, and you get to stop pretending you can make it on your own in that dead-end job." He slid a fresh set of documents across the desk, already marked with tabs for my signature. My stomach dropped. The second mini cliffhanger hit when I glanced at the top page and saw clauses that would have given him permanent control over the largest portion of the inheritance, disguised as family investment protections. I didn't sign. I simply folded the papers and placed them in my bag. "I'll review them with my own advisor first," I said, standing up. My father's face hardened, but he didn't explode the way I expected. Instead, he leaned back with a sigh that sounded almost disappointed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The gala is in 5 days. Think about what your stubbornness could cost all of us." My mother finally spoke again as I reached the door, her voice softer but edged with something new. "Just consider the bigger picture, okay?" She didn't elaborate, but the look she gave me as I left suggested she knew more about the financial mess than she was letting on. I drove away from the house with my hands gripping the wheel, the uncertainty thicker than ever. My father had just shown his hand more clearly than before, and the stakes had risen higher than I anticipated. The following 3 days passed in a blur of quiet preparation and mounting pressure. Laura met me after work one evening in a park near the office, away from any listening ears. She had cross-referenced more records and confirmed the irregularities pointed straight to my father's personal accounts. "It's not just the expansion debt anymore," she said, keeping her voice low as joggers passed us on the path. "There are transfers totaling hundreds of thousands that look like they were funneled to cover personal expenses while the business books show losses. If this comes out at the gala, it could end the grant partnership before it starts." The information settled over me like a weight, but it also sharpened my resolve. I thanked her and promised to keep her updated, knowing that one wrong leak could destroy everything I had built in secret. My fiancé sensed the growing distance and finally pressed me about it over dinner that night. I told him the broad strokes enough to explain why I seemed distant, but I held back the full scope of what I had uncovered. He listened, then pulled me into a hug. "Whatever your father is trying to pull, we face it together," he said. His support felt real, yet I still couldn't shake the fear that dragging him fully into this would only make my father target him harder. That conversation left another thread of suspense dangling. How much longer could I protect the life we were building before my father's plans forced a choice? The night before the gala, my older sister texted me a single message: "Dad expects you to behave. Don't ruin this for the family." The words felt like a final warning, and I stared at them for a long time before deleting the thread. I spent the evening choosing my outfit carefully. Not the modest dress my father expected, but something elegant I had bought months ago and never worn around them. It was the first visible crack in the persona I had maintained for so long. As I hung it in the closet, my phone rang again. It was David Hargrove calling from a private number. "Olivia, I just received an urgent amendment request from your father," he said, his tone urgent. "He's trying to accelerate the trust changes before the gala. I stalled him, but you need to be prepared. Whatever you're planning tomorrow might be your only window." The call ended with that hanging threat, the pieces now fully aligned for the confrontation I knew was coming. I barely slept, the weight of every discovery pressing down on me. My father had spent years viewing me as the weak link, the one who needed fixing, the one whose success he could never see because it didn't fit his vision. Tomorrow at the gala, he would learn exactly how wrong he had been. But as I finally drifted off, one last question circled in my mind. When the truth came out, would my mother's quiet anger be enough to stand with me, or would the cost of choosing myself mean losing even the fragile support I had started to feel from her? The gala was hours away, and the final act was about to begin. The morning of the gala arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the Kansas City air, and I dressed with deliberate care in the elegant emerald green gown I had chosen weeks earlier, the one that reflected the success I had hidden for so long. My fiancé, Ryan Thompson, helped zip it up his hands, steady on my shoulders as he told me I looked incredible, and that whatever happened tonight, we would face it as a team. I kissed him and promised I would be okay, but inside the suspense from David Hargrove's late-night warning still hummed like a live wire. I drove to the downtown event hall alone, the same modest sedan I had used for every family visit, knowing this would be the last time I played the part my father expected. The venue was already buzzing when I arrived, string lights glowing over tables, set for 200 guests, waiters circulating with trays of appetizers that cost more per piece than some people made in an hour. My father had spared no expense to impress the Grant family and seal the alliance he craved. My older sister spotted me first near the entrance, and her eyes widened for a split second at my appearance before she recovered with a tight smile. She pulled me aside near the coat check, her voice low and sharp. "Dad's been asking where you are. He expects you to sit with Tyler Grant all night. Don't make this difficult." I nodded politely and moved on, my heart steady. The second mini cliffhanger of the evening hit when I saw my father across the room, deep in conversation, with a silver-haired man I recognized from photos as Mr. Grant's lead associate, Kevin Ellis. My father's face lit up with that practiced charm he reserved for business, but the moment his gaze landed on me, the charm cracked. He excused himself and strode over, his jaw set in the way that always signaled control was about to be asserted. "Olivia," he said, his tone dripping with that cold sarcasm I knew too well. "You clean up nice for once, but let's be real, that dress doesn't change the fact that your little tech support job and that boyfriend of yours are holding the family back. Tyler Grant is right over there. Spend the evening with him. Show the Grants you understand what loyalty to the business looks like instead of chasing some independence fantasy that's never going to pay the bills." The words cut deep, each one laced with the long-held resentment he felt toward my choices, my refusal to be the obedient daughter who would secure his empire. He leaned in closer, voice dropping. "Sign those trust papers by the end of the night, or I'll make sure the Grants hear exactly how unreliable you are. This isn't a request." My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression calm. The test I had started 22 months ago, now barreling toward its final act. My mother appeared at his elbow, then her face pale, but her eyes carrying that quiet anger I had glimpsed in the study days earlier. She placed a hand on his arm, her voice firm enough to surprise even me. "Victor, that's enough. She's your daughter, not a pawn in one of your deals. Let her breathe for once." It was the strongest stand she had ever taken in front of him, and for a heartbeat, the room around us seemed to pause. My father's face flushed with irritation, but he forced a laugh and waved it off, turning to greet another guest as if nothing had happened. My mother gave me a small nod, something almost like pride flickering there, but I could see the cost it took her, the way her shoulders stayed tense. That moment hung between us like a fragile bridge, the first real sign she might choose differently, yet I knew it might not hold. The evening unfolded with more pressure, building like a storm. My father made sure I was seated next to Tyler Grant at the head table, and during the first course, he steered the conversation toward how perfect an alliance between our families would be for the expansion. Tyler smiled politely, oblivious to the undercurrents, while my father's eyes kept darting to me with that expectant glare. Kevin Ellis joined the table midway through, mentioning casually how impressed the Grants were with the potential partnership and how important family unity was to them. My father seized the opening. "Exactly, Kevin. Olivia here understands that, don't you? Her current situation is just temporary while she figures things out. The business needs this." The sarcasm was sharper now, public enough that a few nearby guests shifted uncomfortably. My older sister nodded along from across the table, adding her own jab about how some people needed guidance to see the bigger picture. My mother sat silent for a long stretch, her fork moving slowly until she finally set it down and looked directly at my father. "Victor, stop. She's not a problem to be fixed. She's built her own life, and we should respect that." Her voice carried across the table, drawing eyes, and my father's expression darkened with genuine shock. It was a varied reaction I had never seen from her before, a mix of exhaustion and defiance that briefly shifted the power in the room. That was when I knew the time had come. I stood slowly, the microphone from the podium nearby, still warm from the earlier welcome speeches. My father tried to pull me back down with a hissed, "Sit down, this isn't the moment," but I stepped away, heart pounding yet clear. I tapped the microphone once, and the room quieted, 200 guests turning toward me. Thank you all for being here to celebrate 25 years of my father's hard work. I began, my voice steady. But there's something I need to share tonight, because his vision for the future seems to include deciding mine for me. Gasps rippled through the crowd as I continued laying out the truth in calm, measured words. I revealed my real role as a senior software architect with 2 patents. My salary of $55,000 a month, the stock options and speaking engagements none of them had known about. I described how my father had assumed I was in a dead-end support role and had spent months pressuring me to redirect my grandmother's trust into his overextended business, even threatening alliances if I refused. I mentioned the documents showing the $2 million in hidden debt and the hundreds of thousands in transfers that benefited personal accounts more than the stores. My father rose halfway out of his chair, face red, his voice booming across the room in a furious interruption. "That's enough, Olivia. You're twisting everything to make yourself look important. This is family business, not some public spectacle." But Kevin Ellis had already pulled out his phone, his expression shifting from polite interest to concern as he texted under the table. My mother stood fully, then her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising strength. "Victor, she's right. You've been controlling this for too long, and I've let it happen. It stops tonight." The words landed like a final crack in the foundation, but even as she said them, I saw the irreversible cost in her eyes, the knowledge that choosing even this small stand meant facing the fracture she had avoided for decades. My older sister stared in disbelief, whispering something sharp to Uncle Frank, who looked between us all with open discomfort. The room erupted in murmurs, phones coming out the gala's celebratory mood shattering into stunned whispers. My father tried to salvage it with more sarcasm, calling my claims exaggerated and demanding I sit down before I embarrassed the family further, but the damage was done. Kevin Ellis excused himself quietly, and I later learned the grant partnership was off the table by the next morning. I set the microphone down and walked off the stage, Ryan meeting me at the edge of the room with a look of quiet awe. He took my hand without a word, and we left together as the chaos continued behind us. In the weeks that followed, the partial victory settled over me like a bittersweet weight. The trust remained fully in my control, thanks to David Hargrove's quick work on the protections, and I used part of it to secure my own future without strings. My father's business faced investigations into the financial irregularities the expansion stalled, and the empire he had built on control began to crumble under scrutiny. Yet the cost was real and permanent. My mother's stand had been brave in the moment, but the family rift that followed proved too deep. She called me once, her voice tired, saying she loved me, but couldn't choose sides without losing the life she had known for 30 years. My older sister cut contact entirely, and my father sent one final message filled with accusations that I had destroyed everything he worked for. I deleted it without replying. Ryan and I grew closer through it all, but the loneliness of losing the family I had once tried so hard to earn approval from lingered in quiet moments. I sat in my apartment one evening, months later, the city lights of Kansas City sparkling beyond the window, and touched the simple gold pendant my grandmother had left me. Her lesson had proven true in the harshest way. A person's character shows when they think you have nothing to offer, and my father had shown his completely. I had reclaimed my autonomy, protected the life I built on my own terms, and chosen myself over the control he demanded. But freedom came with the irreversible loss of the family bonds I had once hoped could be salvaged. It hurt, yet it also brought a quiet strength I carried forward. I was no longer the daughter waiting for approval. I was simply me, whole and unapologetic. Thank you for listening to my story. It still feels raw telling it, but sharing it reminds me I'm not alone in choosing self-respect over toxic expectations. If you've ever had a parent try to rewrite your future for their own gain, what would you have done differently? Drop a comment below. I read everyone.